let's say, the research area, the people, the team, but also the technology that is also around, is the kind of ecosystem where UNITAC comes in. And so both teams are working together. And yeah, the next slide, Lisa, maybe. We have this here, you can see our project advisory committee, a lot of people from different continents with different backgrounds, tech background, of course. The whole project is financed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Germany. It's a cooperation between UN Habitat and also OICT in New York. So we have this strong urban expertise that comes from UN Habitat and the tech expertise that comes from OICT in New York. You can see here different people. Edgar Peters, for example, the director of the African Center for Cities. Andrea Poglio, he works with Edgar, one of the panelists here today. Then we have representatives from companies, or Kuna Kamal, he is the director of the Smart Cities initiative in India. So you see different countries, different expertises, and maybe you can show the next slide, Lisa. This is our team. We are still in the process of hiring people, but it's a mixed team between social science, urban science, and also technology, computer scientists. But we also try to include design and art and so on and so on. We are a team of approximately 15 people. At the moment, still, of course, due to the corona pandemic, not really possible to meet, but hopefully the next year we will be there then in person and can start to work also as a team physically. So here you can see our thematic areas. We have 3 at the moment. First one is open, transparent, and participatory governance of data and digital platforms. So we opened a call at the beginning of this year. We asked people and cities and regions how we can set up collaboration in regard of tech support. And it was interesting to see, of course, that a lot of regions in the world would like to have tools for participatory government. Governments want to speak to their people. They want to include the opinions of people. People want to be informed about the government, about political situations. So we have a lot of participatory tools that we can set up in different countries. Then the next issue is mapping, spatial analysis, data analytics, and visualization. So we map. When we speak about informal settlements, we very often don't have a lot of information about how many people live there, how old are those people, how many kids live there. We don't know how much space those informal areas sometimes take. Urban governments sometimes just don't know. They are growing quite rapidly. So we do map a lot and do work a lot with georeference data. So space and spatial data, spatial analysis is very important in our lab and in our work. And the next area is a more general people-centered smart cities, of course, which is the UN flagship program. The tools and all the work we do is very much connected, of course, to the perspective of the citizens. We create user stories. What do citizens really need? And at the end, we also know that all tech tools only work when there is also a community that uses those tools, and if those tools are well connected to the government of a city. So there's also the human aspect around those tools, which is very important if we really want them to be used in a good way. We are at the moment doing 3 projects, very concrete. One is based in Brazil, in Alagoas. We are trying to support a tool that is the public policy observatory. This tool is more about data storytelling. There is already an urban data management system, and we try to help to set up good data stories so that people can really use those data, that people have access to those data, because we know that there is very often data in the cities, but there are no tools, there's no design, there's no interface for people to use those data. So this is the focus, let's say, in the Brazil project. Then we are doing another project in eThekwini, South Africa. eThekwini is one of the cities with quite a big informal settlement, which grows rapidly also. And we try to set up a tool that helps us seeing the spaces and where are the informal settlements, how do they grow, and it's a planning tool actually at the end. And yeah, this is what we do in eTequini. And then we have another project. This is the city resilience profiling tool. That's also a very interesting or very strong topic at the moment, that we have a lot of tools about monitoring, about predicting also resilience aspects. You can see here on the left side the different aspects. And we are implementing these tools to other cities and trying to, also to help governments to use these tools to predict resilience factors and yeah, help to analyze the situation in regard of resilience in different cities. Okay, so that's it from my side. Here you can see the UNITAC website, and as I already said, we do work with, of course, UN Habitat. This is a UN Habitat entity here. So my colleague Pontus Westenberg, he's also part of UNITAC, who's one of the speakers here. He works at UN Habitat, but is also part of the UNITAC team here in Hamburg. And yeah, we have done also projects with GIZ from the City Science Lab, the Hafen City University. I did not show those tools now here. We also have an ICLAI project, so we know Marike von Staden. And we also do work with the African Center for Cities, which is one of the most prestigious research centers in Africa. So I'm very happy. This is we are kind of a team here also now, that we all came together here and taking the time to speak to each other. And I would like now to hand over to my colleague Pontus Westerberg. Pontus is the Program Management Officer of the innovation sector at UN Habitat in Nairobi, but you are in Barcelona, Pontus, and you know very well also the work of UNITAC because you are part of it. You are part of the team who set this up, and I'm very happy now to have you here as one of my guests, and I hand over to you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Gesa. Thanks for that introduction. As Gesa said, I work at UN Habitat in our innovation section and part of the UNITAC team. And I'm going to talk about our perspective on digital technology innovation and citizen and climate change. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Can you see it, Gesa?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. So, first of all, some words about the UN perspective and on cities, and we see here the UN Secretary General talking about how cities are really on the front line of sustainable development. They are vulnerable to disasters, they emit emissions, and we also have now more than 50% of the world's population living in them. So they are really at the front line of sustainable development. We have Sustainable Development Goal 11 on cities and communities as well, but almost all the Sustainable Development Goals have some kind of impact or relationship to our cities. So it's really important that we get our cities right for sustainable development, of course. And one of the issues here is on carbon emissions. So cities have about 55% of the world's population, but they are responsible for 70 to 75% of the world's emissions. So there is a mismatch there. And we really, decarbonizing cities as a real fundamental concern if we are going to keep the world to less than 1.5 degrees of warming. We say cities are where the climate battle will be lost or won. Part of that, of course, is what we call national urban commitments. I think you're all familiar of the national commitments as part of the Paris agreements. But cities are, of course, not officially included in that. It's really important that national governments really think about working with local governments to see how the urban perspective is included. And UN Habitat, a big part of our work is what we call national urban policies, working with member states to help them create policies and strategies on how to manage urbanization. And as we can see here, we've done a review and found that only 14% of the world's national urban policies have an explicit focus on climate change. And so that is obviously something that really needs to change if we're going to achieve this. And it's a big task, and I'll get to this a little bit more. The IPCC have said that in order to be able to stay under 1.5 degree of warming, we need to have annual global emissions reductions of 7.6%. And if we consider the last year with COVID, when basically large parts of the world were shut down, we only had a reduction of 8.5, so 8.5% in COVID times. So it kind of illustrates, I think, the scale of the challenge that we have ahead of us. We're finding that climate finance is not reaching cities. The total amount that is needed for adaptation is $30 billion. Only about, or less than $4 billion of that is focused on cities. So that's quite a big challenge, and especially that we are considering that 75% of the world's urban infrastructure that is needed by 2050 is still to be built. That, of course, is a huge challenge, but also an opportunity to get urban infrastructure right. So I wanted to frame this a little bit within a recent report by the International Energy Association. It's called Net Zero by 2050. It came in May this year, and it basically sets out everything that the IEA considers that we need to do in order to be able to reach this target of net zero by 2050. It's extremely ambitious, bordering on fantasy, I would almost say. It assumes, for example, that beyond this year there will be no new coal-fired power stations, and there will be no further prospecting on oil and gas. And I think we know that is probably not true. And if you look at the graph here, we are there in 2020, and you can see this huge reduction that needs to happen by 2050. We have the green behavioral changes, we have the blue low carbon technologies with the active involvement of consumers, and then we have the yellow, which is low carbon technologies. Essentially, the yellow is mainly industry, and blue, I think, is really where we can mainly see kind of digital innovation happening. And I just want to use this very ambitious scenario that or roadmap that they've developed to kind of frame the rest of the discussion. So 3 things are really needed to meet this. The first is massive clean energy expansion, and you can see here the kind of graph from the report on electricity generation in 2010 until 2050. The grayish kind of brownish color there is fossil fuels, the green is renewables, and the yellow is what they call indirect renewables, which are things like biofuels, etc. And you can see the scenario here, how we need to go from 29% renewables in 2020 to 88% in 2050. Very ambitious. And what do we need? We need, of course, and I'm focusing here on cities, we need wind, urban wind. That picture here on the bottom left, which they call tulip wind farms, are actually a way to make small wind, which can work in cities, look a little prettier. We need, of course, huge investment in solar. We need things like district energy for heating and cooling, and we need biofuels and waste to energy. And all of those things to make them function also need a lot of innovation in digital technologies. We need artificial intelligence, we need smart grids, we need to collect data in better ways, etc. So huge needs here to make this happen. The second area is around building efficiency, materials and technologies. And the graph here from the IEA report is on building heating mainly. And again, you can see the scale of the challenge, going from 83% renewables to a mix there in 2050 with only 9% of fossil fuels. And what do we need to look at? We need to look at a variety of technologies. We need to look at 3D printing. We need to look at all sorts of different kinds of smart buildings that require a lot of digital technology. We need to really build out our capacity on digital twins and BIM, building information management systems. The picture there is using BIM to be able to analyze the efficiency of a building. And of course, we need things like heat pumps and cooling pumps that also require a lot of innovation in digital technologies. And the final third area is around transport and mobility. And here again, you can see the graph on road transport, the scale of the challenge going from now to 95% fossil fuels to a completely different mix in 2050. And of course, a big part here is going to be around electrification, which needs, from a city perspective, of course, very big investments, both in planning, but things like charging infrastructure and incentives for people to make that switch. We see the growth, of course, in other types of electric mobility, like scooters, etc. We need electric buses, and you know, as we're seeing from UN Habitat's perspective, we also need to really start thinking about things like drones for deliveries and things like that. All of that needs to come together, and cities play a real important role in steering this. I just want to say a couple of things about what we're doing at UN Habitat. I could make an hour-long presentation of all the different things, but just picked out two things. One is around the campaign that we're running at the moment, which is called Climate Action for Cities. You can look for the hashtag there on social media, and also find the website under Climate Action for Cities. This brings together a wide variety of different stakeholders and many cities to call for urgent action on climate action in cities. And also on that website, there are a number of solutions that are being proposed and charged. The other thing I wanted to just mention is the Climate Smart Cities Challenge. This is an innovation challenge that we are launching on the 3rd of November, so in about 10 days time. We're working with 4 cities, Bogota, Bristol, Curitiba, and Maquindé-Sabagabo. And we're launching on the 3rd of November a global call for climate smart solutions from innovators from across the world that will then be taken forward to be tested in system demonstrators in those 4 cities in the coming year. And we have connected a lot of different partners to this challenge. You can see some of the names there: Viable Cities, the Swedish Energy Agency, Mission Innovation, etc. And looking forward also to finding ways to collaborate with UNITAC on this, and very interested in adding more partners. This has a lot. We think that challenge-driven innovation can be a really good way of finding climate smart solutions. 2 final words. One is around, of course, the fact that digital has its own problems. This is a data center, I think in the southern United States. I think it's important to be aware of the fact that even though we live in a virtual world more and more, data actually has a cost, let's say, it needs to be stored somewhere, and the data is stored in these kind of data centers that are actually quite resource intensive, depending on where they are built. And now the global ICT industry is responsible for about 2% of global carbon emissions, which is about the same as the aviation industry. Data centers themselves is about 0.3 to 0.5 of carbon emissions, so it's actually quite sizable. And so I think it's important that we also consider the carbon impact on the digital tools that we apply. Blockchain, for example, is extremely resource intensive, and we need to really consider whether tools like that are appropriate before applying them. And then finally, before I close, let's not forget tried and tested urbanist measures also. Good urban planning, good neighborhood planning, public space, public transport, walking, cycling, and combined, of course, with those innovations that we need to see. I love this picture with a kind of nicely planned neighborhood next to a solar farm in the Netherlands, which is from the UN Habitat World Cities report that came out last year on the value of sustainable urbanization. So that's what I wanted to cover. I hope I was in the time, Gesa, and back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pontus. I see a lot of applause, virtual applause. Can you also see that on the screen? That's for you. Thanks a lot, Pontus, for giving us this this global perspective on this issue. Like UN Habitat work, you gave us a lot of numbers, and also those 3 categories like clean energy expansion, building efficiency, and mobility. I think so too. Those are also in research the most important research areas that we do work on. And I also appreciated that you mentioned this climate smart city challenge initiative that you are going to launch. Maybe you can tell us a little later a bit more about this, because this connects those areas that we are talking about here in this panel. So thank you very much, Pontus. So I would like to hand over to Teresa Kerber. She's our next speaker. She is from GIZ, the International Smart Cities Network project lead. And I would like to take the opportunity, Teresa, to thank you very much for this cooperation here, that we were able to organize this event here. And I'm very happy that you are part of it, because GIZ is one of the most important players in the whole urbanization discourse for us as researchers, but also in regard of projects. So thank you very much for joining, and I hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I was asked to show some examples from GIZ work. 1 second, why is not okay? Technology has been developing very fast. For example, algorithms and advanced control systems are used to optimize and schedule the low demanding energy systems in an efficient way. Or early warning systems for floods use monitoring satellites and mobile communication channels. Or awareness raising on cause and impacts of climate change use augmented reality, so that you can really see what are the impacts of climate change in your cities. And I always like to start every presentation with this study from the German Advisory Council on Global Change, Our Common Future, and from 2019. And they state that without digitalization, the SDGs are not achievable. In order to put the digital transformation at the service of the transformation towards sustainability, the potential and risks of digital technologies and solutions must be understood and aligned with the SDGs worldwide. But digitalization has to be done right. At GIZ, we worked with the digital principles of digital development as orientation. For example, design with the user, understand the existing digital ecosystem, design for scale, but also use open standards, open data, and address privacy and security. Climate change, urbanization, and digital transformation are closely interlinked and need to be addressed together. And sustainable development for cities is impossible to without taking into account 3 things, according to our experience. First, the spatial growth, infrastructure needs, and resource demands of urban areas, especially of the urban areas with inefficient planning and management systems. Second, the impact and required transformational adaptations rising from a changing climate with increasingly frequent and severe weather events like El Niño, for example, and the reach and penetration of digital infrastructure, solutions, and multi-stakeholder processes in physical, economical, and social systems through digital transformation. Some use cases and examples from GIZ work, starting from the global agenda and going deeper into the challenges of different partner cities. GIZ used to work in projects. This is why the examples are distributed in the projects that GIZ is implementing. First of all, the sector project cities implemented by GIZ on behalf of the Federal Ministry for Economic Development, Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ, developed CityWorks. CityWorks is a digital toolkit that helps cities, authorities, and urban planners to understand and connect global agendas with the local vision and realities. This is a sort of working aid for city specialists. You can find all the links in the presentation. I can also upload the presentation as PDF for all of you here in the chat. Let's say you already aligned your local policies with the global agendas, then you would like to set standards in comparison to the international efforts. The project Climate Smart Cities, implemented by GIZ on behalf of the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety, BMU, within the framework of the International Climate Initiative, the ICI, and in cooperation with the Federal Ministry of the Interior, Building and Community, the BMI, developed a Climate Smart Cities assessment framework. They are now in the version 2.0. And this was developed for MOHUA, for the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs of the Government of India. And this is part of the Smart Cities mission focus on 3 pillars for performance: livability, economic ability, and sustainability for the cities in India. Now, let's say you already have also the international standards in your city policies and city projects, and need to further define an urban challenge in your city to get to the bottom of the problem, or to define, let's say, terms of reference for procurement processes. The advisory project, International Smart Cities Network, implemented by GIZ on behalf of BMI, can offer you the format of the challenge labs. All you need to bring to the lab is an idea of a challenge that you and your community is facing. And in the lab, we will work on that challenge and then further define it. This was part of a competition with 6 partner cities and 5 German cities. Then let's say you already have a well-defined urban challenge and want to know, is there already a digital solution for my challenge on the market? In that case, we can offer an international ideas competition. The Open Social Innovation Format Solution for Cities was launched to support 11 partner cities in finding digital solutions that are good answers to their local challenges. And the competition was defined along 6 areas of action: social cohesion, vibrant urban and local centers, mobility, resilience, access, especially for elderly, and digital competencies. Now, let's say there is no digital solution on the market, and you need to create a new tailor-made, affordable one for your city. The global project, ACT-based adaptation to climate change in cities, implemented by GIZ on behalf of BMU and in cooperation with BMI, developed a practical guide co-creating climate smart cities for developing digital solutions for and with the citizens and public sector organizations. We all love hackathons and design thinking and Scrum and or agile methods, but the question is when we use what? And this is the question that this practical guide answers or was trying to answer. And at the end, the digital solutions were developed with this practical guide and in the partner countries of India, Peru, and Mexico. Now, let's say you got a wonderful digital solution. You love it, but you want more. You need to foster the local innovation ecosystem in your city, in your country. The global project Digital Transformation, implemented by GIZ on behalf of BMZ, has another approach, another format called Digital Transformation Centers. And these are physical and virtual hubs supporting the advancement of digital ecosystem in our partner countries. And let's say you need to support the growth of an enabling environment for startups to foster innovation in your city, but also want to enrich your digital ecosystem with other actors, European digital actors. The sector project Digital Transformation for the Make IT Alliance is also working in different formats with a global approach. Let's say other cities are making similar differences, similar experiences, how to promote continuous learning and knowledge sharing. Again, the International Smart Cities Network has a new format called Online Advisory Program. And this is a combination of different online formats that the ISCN has established on as basis for knowledge exchange and knowledge transfer in the field of smart cities. You can also find more information on the website Smart City Dialogue from the Federal Ministry of the Interior, Building and Community. Now let's go deeper. More concrete examples, for example, the study on artificial intelligence for sustainable urban development from the sector Project Cities, with real world use cases with the potentials of AI supported approaches for sustainable urban development in 6 urban sectors, for example, planning, waste management, construction, and so on. Let's say your city center is dying because of COVID-19 lockdowns. One of the winners of the International Ideas Competition Solution for Cities was Mi Mercado AMG. The metropolitan area of Guadalajara was looking for a digital solution in order to maintain the city centers vibrant and avoid decrease because of COVID-19 lockdowns. And they found a digital solution from the Kampala Capital City Authority in Uganda. And they worked together during the international competitions on defining a prototype for implementation. Now this digital solution is going to be implemented in Mexico and Guadalajara. You may say they are already solutions for that, but the current solutions that are on the market in Mexico means that they are young men and young women working 14 hours, 15 hours in delivering things, but they still cannot make a living. This is not the digitalization that we want. We want a digitalization that is inclusive for the common good and that leave no one behind. You want suggestions on up?
I have to play the timekeeper a little bit. There's 1 minute left. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. You want suggestions on how to improve storm water management in the city and achieve the goals of the State Action Climate Plan. We can offer you the Mu City Savior digital solution. The Mu City Savior means I am the city savior, and this is the winner of the category Best Climate Smart City Project of the Smart City Empowering India Awards 2019 of the Government of India. Another one, you need to preserve the biodiversity in your city and have enough staff to map and maintain the green spaces and the trees in your city. There is also a digital solution called Internet of Trees. You can also find the information online. Everything is open source. And you haven't found a good solution or a good method and need the support of a top expert on digitalization in cities, the project expert for municipal partnerships worldwide, implemented by GIZ on behalf of BNZ, can also offer you an assignment of an integrated senior policy advisor, like in this case, with the city twinning between Jakarta and Berlin. And both cities together are now also supporting Bangkok. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Teresa Kerber, for this, all those insights of your work, the work of GIZ. I think it's very, very impressive, and it would be great if you could put your presentation to the chat. So I think the online links could be very interesting also for the audience. And what I liked a lot is that you opened up so many different perspectives, like you created already expert tools, then there is like policy writing or urban policy writing. This is what Pontus also addressed, that UN Habitat, of course, is doing a lot. Then the Challenge Lab is more the citizen perspective, so that citizens can come with their ideas, and also education and teaching with the online courses. So it's really a very, very broad portfolio that you presented here. Thank you for this excellent talk, Teresa. So I hand over to our next speaker, Marieke van Staden, the director of ICLEI, Bonn Center for Local Climate Action and Reporting. And she is also the director of business development. And ICLEI is a network of more than 2,500 local and regional governments committed to sustainable development. And I'm very happy to meet you here. ICLE is also a very interesting or important funder of research also. And I like a lot that the initiatives are getting more and more known also by us researchers. So very welcome, warm welcome to you, Marike. And I would like to say that we shouldn't exceed the time too much. So if you can stay within the 10 minutes or 11 or 12 minutes, it would be great.
Sure.
So thank you for coming, and the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, GIZ. Can you confirm you can see my slides?
Yes, and we can
Wonderful.
hear you. Okay.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I think this is such an important topic, especially considering we're now in a climate emergency and digitalization really can be an enabler. Very briefly, for those of you who don't know ICLE, we're a network of local and regional governments that are committed to sustainable development, active in more than 125 countries, and we have 24 offices worldwide. And our work is very much focused on sustainable development and bringing 5 pathways as entry points, looking at climate action, low emission development, nature-based solutions, also a people-centered approach to our urban areas, resilient development, and circular development. And all of these items touch on digitalization and the topic of today. And as you can see, we've got offices around the globe. Our World Secretariat is based in Bonn in Germany, where I am also based. Now, if we look at digitalization as an enabler, and I really want to build on what Pontus and Teresa have shared so far, for us, when we work with local and regional governments, we can improve government administration, government operations. Many local governments, for example, own or co-own or have a stake in an energy utility or a waste operations. So we can also help inform decisions by using digitalization. But I want to stress one thing. We are not in an equalized world. We are in a world where many local governments, especially in the global south, I'm thinking of many small communities in Africa, for example, where your local government staff don't even have a computer. So we're talking now about a quantum shift. You're talking from paper to computer, and we're still in a paper age in many of our local governments where they have to fill in forms in quadruplets and send it in all directions. So digitalization and digitization will help us also save the trees by switching to modern computing, from manual to more automated processes, but also integrating the new technologies into our daily life, our daily work, and informing and helping us work in an easier and more effective manner. The second point I wish to focus on is measuring, monitoring, tracking impacts, and analyzing. And we know in this time where we were trying to localize the SDGs, we're trying to move forward with sustainable development, and we need digitalization to help us as a tool to be able to track all these multiple facets and all the multiple topics across multiple levels of government, bringing also information to help us understand what are we doing wrong, what are we doing right, and helping us to analyze and move forward. And we're doing this across multiple stakeholders. So if we're informing and engaging the citizens in our cities, we want to work with the businesses in our cities, we want to work with different levels of government. And this provides a true opportunity for us to step up and be more efficient again. And last but not least, I think it's also an offering, an enabling space to innovate and to maybe in a very practical hands-on way to transform the sustainability landscape. And there it means improving our performance, helping us to embed resilience in our systems and processes. And I think the COVID pandemic, as well as climate change, has highlighted the weakness in our society, in our systems, in our structures, the inequalities as well. And these we can definitely address very effectively by using digitalization to transform our jobs and catalyze lifestyle changes as well, and help us understand where we as individuals fit into the picture. Now, in the climate emergency, which is now really the dangerous space we're in, it is important to use this opportunity to improve the accuracy of the data. The quantity and the quality of data can be overwhelming. I think also we see that with our local governments, if you bring different data sets to speak to each other, but it helps us take better decisions. So it's also a really important space where we can better inform not only our decision makers, but also the people in our communities. When I'm thinking now of the flooding that happened earlier this year in Germany, in China, people, the warnings came in time, and one can update information to people. You can trigger action, so also optimize through this. But if we bring it back to national governments, they need to have particular.
Sorry for
interrupting. I would like to zoom in on how we can use the space. Greenhouse gas inventories, for example, is also you can bring multiple layers of data into the space, also our climate risk and vulnerabilities to help understand from an urban planning perspective your threats if you're in a flood zone. These are opportunities where we are trying to also guide and inform our local governments to use the digitalization approach. At the bottom, you will see a link to our Daring Cities session where we also had digitalization as a game changer in the climate emergency response. Practically to act, what is ICLEI doing in this space? We have very clear approaches. We're guiding access to finance, we're guiding selection of technologies, appropriate solutions. We're helping gathering of data, which then in turn go into the greenhouse gas inventories, the climate risk and vulnerability assessments, as well as the climate action plans. We support innovation and research, and in that sense, we'd be very happy to connect to GIZ and her team as well to make sure that we can connect and join forces to build out partnerships, which are really needed in this space. Sharing of good practice, I think also what Fontes referred to, a lot of to also better understand this space, because this is still very new to our subnational governments in a very practical way. But last but not least, I think it was also important to stress that the cities and our local governments are keen to be leaders, and they definitely also wish to pilot new opportunities. And it was wonderful to see the examples Teresa pointed out of Bhubaneswar and others in network. Now, we bring all of this together in our Green Climate Cities program as an umbrella program for scaling up and accelerating adaptation, resilience, and mitigation, looking not only at your own government operations, but also at your whole community, the whole city or the territory, and making sure that we can co-design using data, digitization, and digitalization to unfold towards climate neutrality, which means going to net zero and optimizing our approach to resilience. The challenge is we need to do this in all topics, on all sectors, in all themes, and that's where local governments get overwhelmed. And I think that's where this particular focus could really help them to bring that into their daily work, to also make sure that there is a correct approach to collecting community and to make sure that everybody is on board in the same space. Now, we run a reporting system together with CDP, and I just want to focus on again, I like to come back to the data piece, which is just one piece in the digitalization space. But we are looking at all of these topics and trying to collect the information that comes from the subnationals on transport, buildings, food and waste, and so on, to help them assess where they are now and where they can go into the future and move forward in a very practical sense, again, bringing in data sets such as the our Environmental Insights Explorer from Google and other data sets that could inform them on actions. An example, Makati City, for example, brought in a particular piece allowing payment through digital systems, and it was aimed at trying to reduce people coming to the council offices to pay in person. So they created this digital payment system. In the end, it also had a climate impact by showing reducing traffic and transport emissions with people sitting at home and being able to digitize or digitally pay. But then I want to zoom in on The example Ponte showed us with these huge climate data, these data centers, why are they not running on renewable energy? We can also get renewable energy certificates of origin and other opportunities that could really help us shift from the paper to the virtual space, and also making sure that we can drastically reduce our emissions, protect our communities by stepping up adaptation and resilience. And this is a target that many of our local and regional governments have set. They are keen to move forward, and they need to know and look at the good solutions and opportunities out there. Thank you very much, Giza, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Marike, for this very inspiring and dedicated talk. Very nice to see what you all do. And I like a lot that you put this headline of digitalization as enabler in front of your presentation, and that you also again emphasized on that we have to join forces. I mean, when we see the project of GIZ, the project of UNITAC, your projects, there's so many technology around, there are so many good projects, and this is also what I think at the beginning we have to join the forces and try to find a little bit an overview and really work together. And I also like that you again said that ICLAI helps to access to finance projects. That this is also very important for us, of course, to know how to, financing is not only about money, it's also about partnerships. So that's important behind it. So thank you very much. I had a little problems with the sound during your lecture. I don't know if it was only me, but I think I got the story, and hopefully the audience got it too. So now I would like to hand over to our last speaker, Andrea Poglio. Very delighted to meet you here. You are a researcher at the African Center for Cities and also Politecnico di Torino. And as I already said at the beginning, we have now the researcher's perspective. As in UNITAC, there's also a strong researcher part, and we are trying to set up a long-term cooperation with the African Center for Cities, also for UNITAC. So you are one of our main research, you will be one of our main research partners in UNITAC. And you have done a lot of very highly quoted research on social inequity. And I'm very curious to see your presentation now, Andrea. Very nice that you are part of it. So the microphone is yours.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Yesa, and thanks for the invitation today, and for the opportunity for us as the African Center for Cities to share some of the work that we have been doing around digital innovation and what we call just urban transitions. So as you mentioned, I'm actually seconded here from Turin in Italy, and I just want to acknowledge my funder. My funder is the European Commission through the Horizon 2020 program. So slide, please. So the premise that I want to make is about the African Center for Cities, which is an academic research center based at the University of Cape Town. And our mandate is to create a dialogue between research and both the private and the public sectors, with the idea of using knowledge to inform some of the conversations around sustainability and urbanization in Africa specifically. So that is to say that ultimately our expertise is around leveraging knowledge production for the sake of shifting some of these conversations that we think are necessary to make our cities more resilient and also without creating further inequalities. So I've got colleagues here at the African Center for Cities that are working on sustainable food networks and food security. Others are working on youth and tech and sustainable transitions. But I am specifically part of the, I am embedded in the digital and more broadly in the infrastructure program. So I'm going to be sharing with you some of the work from that perspective, from that particular perspective. And one of the examples of this work was actually kind of mentioned a few times today around, you know, the nexus of logistics, mobility, and digitization. And one example of the work we're doing is with the Volvo Foundation, and is about the kind of the role of platform technologies in the mobility space across 3 African cities that we're looking at. And we're particularly interested in logistics systems, motorbike taxis, and how they are reshaping some of the questions around sustainability and sustainable mobility in Nairobi, Kigali, and Cape Town. So this is kind of an example of the work that we're doing at this interface between digital innovation and sustainability in cities. But today, for this presentation, I actually want to speak about another project that is slightly less focused on digital innovation, but more on the kind of infrastructure underlying digital innovation, because as I said, I'm part of the infrastructure team at ACC. So this other piece of research is a collaboration between the Alfred Herrhausen Gesellschaft and the African Center for Cities. And the topic is sustainable infrastructure finance in Africa, the first output of which you see in the slide, and that is a collaboration between Edgar Peters, Liza Cirolia, who could not be here today, and myself. So the report that you see in the slide is the first in a series of in a series of reports that we are using to actually bring stakeholders to the table to actually have a conversation around the bottlenecks for more sustainable investment in infrastructure, and we just had a very engaging workshop with the European Investment Bank, the African Development Bank, GIZ was there as well, BMZ was there as well. And the idea of having starting these conversations for us are around, envisioning new synergies between research and development finance. So when we started this work, from the very beginning, we realized that there was a general kind of lack of understanding of the infrastructural component of digital innovation. And that having a conversation about the sustainable infrastructure financing also needed to be a conversation about digital infrastructure. And that we could not talk about water, energy, mobility without talking about ICT. And the second thing we realized was that we could not address the question of a sustainable digital innovation without addressing, without talking about the sustainability of the infrastructure that supports it. And so that's kind of a provocation that I want to bring today to the table. Slide, please. So one of the problems, and I think Pontus mentioned it earlier, when we discussed the potential of digital innovation, is the fact that digital services seem very different from other energy and kind of resource-intensive industries, because they are, they seem light and immaterial. But in reality, digital innovation depends on large-scale infrastructures that are made possible by enormous quantities of not just energy, but also minerals, labor that usually remain out of sight. So if we take the example of a digital application running on a smartphone, we can think, and we can actually use the example of an application that is designed to address a specific environmental concern, be it energy, reducing energy consumption or enabling a particular form of sustainable mobility. But to fully understand the benefits and the costs of this application, in our opinion, we need at least to consider two components of the infrastructure that make it possible. So on one hand, we have the handset itself, so the smartphone, and on the other hand, we have what was already mentioned, so the data infrastructure that that makes the internet possible fundamentally. So if you look at the first component of a mobile phone, we know that the majority of handsets are not made in the continent. They're not produced here. So that means that at the very least, the logistic industry is involved. If anything, because even the assembly plants that are here on the continent assemble components that are made elsewhere in China or in South Korea. So, and we know that the container shipping industry has a very high environmental footprint because large ships use low-grade fuels and et cetera, et cetera. But then, if we look at the components of each single smartphone, not only do we need to consider the industrial processes that that have gone into making the phone or the components, but the whole extractive industry through which the raw materials are actually sourced in the very first place. And some of these extractive industries like the cobalt, the copper, the platinum are here on the African continent and have a very significant human costs, and besides the environmental costs, right? Because they're labor intensive and often they operate in kind of like gray legal arrangements. So, and not just we need to consider the minerals that go into the production, but we also to consider the kind of, you know, the tailings of the mining industry, but also the fact that phones at some point, because of their obsolescence, they become e-waste. And Africa is actually the main destination of e-waste in the world. And actually, it's not. It is an urban problem, because we know that the biggest, for example, e-waste dump in the world is in Accra. So it's an urban phenomenon as well. The other component that we need to take into account is the actual, you know, the data infrastructure through which digital services operate. And here too, we have a logistic layer, and then we have a kind of industrial layer, which was mentioned earlier, and that is the kind of, you know, the data center industry, which, you know, is very energy intensive. It was mentioned, it has a similar, now bigger actually, carbon footprint than the oil airline industry. And it is growing at an actual much rapid pace than many other industries because of our increased use of computing and storage, our needs to, you know, to have more storing and computing capacity. And data centers are not just consuming enormous quantities of energy, but they are also actually big machines that work as kind of industrial scale conductors. So to make those conductors work, again, we have a mineral layer and a waste layer that are kind of involved in the processes that allow, you know, our data capacity. And generally, also data centers have kind of energy resilience, energy redundancy built in. So they usually have generators that work on fossil fuels, or they have batteries whose lithium comes from the same mines, you know, that make the same batteries for mobile phones. Slide, please. So one of the pieces of work that we did on digital infrastructure was actually map the presence of data centers, data center capacity in Africa. And I'm not going to get into the details of what we found, but I'm just going to say a couple of things about kind of the sustainability implications. So we know that data hosting on the continent is 1%, less than 1% of the global capacity, which means that having 16% of the global users of the internet, it means that the data capacity here is much smaller than anywhere else in the world. And also, it's very unevenly distributed because 2/3 of large-scale data centers in the continent are actually in South Africa, where I'm joining you from today. So the point is that to have digital innovation, we also need to increase the capacity of African countries to actually host data for a whole series of reasons that I'm not going to get into. But to have that increased capacity, we need to consider that that these are large-scale infrastructures that will require additional energy capacity, but and they have a large land footprint, and because they're currently just driven by the private sector, the kind of the distribution of across the continent is very unequal. Last slide, please. So what do we do in practice? So in our current work with these financing stakeholders, we're actually trying to raise and ask this question. And that seems very simple, but it's kind of very provocative in our opinion. And the question is, how do we factor in the hidden costs of digital innovation in the processes of digital innovation themselves? So, and these kind of hidden costs are all those that I mentioned very briefly. So they're the human costs in terms of labor, they're the extracted costs in terms of resources, and they're the waste costs, the energy costs, and so forth. So, and just to preempt a kind of fair critique that we usually get is that, comparing digital innovation to other energy intensive industries is wrong because, a single person using a single smartphone for a single application is actually like the marginal footprint of that is very small. But that does not mean that the infrastructure behind it is small. And that's what we're trying to actually bring to the conversation today is that, the single transaction might be small, but the infrastructure that makes it possible is actually not. And so we don't have kind of solutions yet, but our solution is I guess to bring important stakeholders to the table and look at that question from the perspective of financing sustainable urban infrastructure. And so 3 things we came up with that we're actually kind of brainstorming with finance sectors are the following. The first is that we need to approach the nexus of digital innovation and sustainability and cities with a also from an infrastructural perspective, right? So taking into account the whole value chain, not just the end service. Then we need to think of digital infrastructure in conversation with the mobility, with the water, with the sanitation, with the energy infrastructures as well, because a lot of the kind of sustainability questions are always at the interface of those different infrastructural kind of configurations. And finally, we think it is important to consider digital infrastructure at the level of the design. So as a design concern rather than as a kind of afterthought or as an externality, because, and that's the kind of a hopeful message that I leave you with today, is that we think that these systems are emerging, they are kind of new, and so there is scope and there is bandwidth to actually, from the design of them, from the very starting point of them, make them more just and more sustainable. And so thank you. That was all from the, I guess, infrastructure team at ACC. And thank you for this very, very great conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrea, for this contribution, and thank you for drawing our attention to the hidden costs of digitalization and digital infrastructure. I think it's a kind of basic research that you do that is very, very important. So I think all the speakers, they mentioned it a little bit, but you really focused on it and made it more specific and more explicit. And I like this a lot. I mean, you turned our attention to data infrastructure, a very energy-intensive data infrastructure, and also, again, to the continent of Africa, where raw materials like raw earth materials are. And this is, like you said, very labor-intensive and so on and so on. So there are a lot of issues that we have to discuss, and that I like it a lot that you made this so explicit. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay, so we have time still now to discuss. We have overrun the time a little, but I think there is still some time, and I would like to address the audience already now. If you have questions, maybe you can put them already now in the chat. I think that Lisa and Livia, they will observe the chat a little bit if I don't see it, and will raise their hands if there are questions from your side. I have a question to all of you, to all the speakers. I don't know who wants to start. I'm always very interested in very concrete projects, and the focus of our work, also the work of UNITAC, but I think the work of all of us, is the people at the end. And we know that sometimes with these digital projects, we have to take care that we don't leave people behind, and that's different in different cities. It depends on the educational background of people. It depends on the age. It depends on how much money someone has, how much access someone has to data and technology. Is there a practice? Is there a habit? Is there a tradition? It's very, very different in very different countries. That's my experience in having worked in different countries. And I would like to ask you how we can prevent negative effects on poverty, inequality, and marginalized groups. Maybe some of you, maybe I can hand this to you, Teresa, because you presented so many very, very concrete projects. How is your experience about this, about including really marginalized group, engaging them, and also at the end maintaining the projects and the technology on site? Maybe you will start.
Yes, I can start. Thank you. From our experience, it is really necessary to start from the needs of the citizens. If we have a look to Google Play Store, for example, there are a lot of digital solutions, apps, but most of them are not used, because in the design, they did not start with from the needs of the citizens. This is why we used to work with agile methods, with citizen-centered design thinking, Scrum, and other methodologies. And using these agile methods, we discovered that we also need to include a sort of inclusive factor in the design of the processes. And for example, in the workshops in Mexico, for the design thinking tracks, we asked the participants to bring another person from the piloting area, but this person should be the complete opposite. If I am a housewife, I have to bring somebody that is not a housewife and it's not a woman. If I am a truck driver, I have to bring a woman and without driving license, for example. And this is one point. And the other point is with this design thinking and agile methods, people start thinking about their family, not only about themselves, but also, and what would happen in case of a flood in my city? What would happen with my grandma and with my child is in the kindergarten? And starting with the needs from the citizens is key. And they start thinking about the whole family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I agree with you totally. It's very often a design question. Also, it's a question of process and design not in the understanding of making something beauty, but making the process accessible. So how to engage people, how to make it understandable what we actually do. And that's I would agree with you. There is a chat in the question. There is a question in the chat for you, Marike. There's someone who asked, it would be great to learn more about the ongoing work on ICLEI on connecting city-level data to the national GHG inventories. And this is a good question for all of us, because we do make this very concrete projects on one hand, and on the other hand, we are all engaged or all part of policy writing. And how can you connect those two worlds? Marike, maybe you would like to comment on this.
Sure, Geza, thank you for that very important question. We've been working collecting data from subnational governments who are, they're not mandatory required to deal with climate change. So that it's not a legal requirement, which means they're doing it at a voluntary basis, and they're also reporting voluntarily, which is part of the problem that we're facing now, that they don't have the budget to deal with a lot of the actions that are necessary. But what we've collected over time, ICLEI together with CDP and other partners, is a range of greenhouse gas inventories that reflect the whole city or the territory that is then administered by that local or regional government. And these increasingly have been improved in terms of quality over time, also because we have designed together with C40 and WRI a standard or a protocol on how to develop robust greenhouse gas inventories at the community level. That is called the GPC in short. This was an important milestone because we saw then the quality improving steadily. What we've done is the GPC was designed to conform to the IPCC requirements that are used by the national government level, but it unpacked greenhouse gas inventory so that a mayor and the councillors can better understand which sectors. So we structured it in a way that makes it useful as a tool for the local government and the local decision makers, but also that it can dock into a vertically integrated system where the national government is designing and using different data sets to make a national greenhouse gas inventory, quite often based on data that is maybe not so robust. A lot of assumptions are coming into the national greenhouse gas inventories. And what we're trying to do is bring the bottom up data, different data sets that would be either confirming or identifying weaknesses and gaps in the national inventory. So we're trying to merge top-down, bottom-up. We've done a study also funded by an ICI project from the German government through the Climate Footprint Project, and I can put the link to that publication in the chat function a bit later. But we've studied in Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, India, what these systems look like. Are they speaking to each other? Is the bottom-up system speaking to the top-down system? In most cases, the national governments have not yet designed very robust systems that we would call them vertically integrated greenhouse gas reporting systems. But we've identified weaknesses and opportunities for those countries to do so. And it's an open offer from CDP and ICLEI to say, please use the data that we have for your country. We have wonderful data that national governments can use, and we're offering a connection to our system to allow the data to speak to each other, to avoid double counting, but also to understand locally where there are opportunities for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We're not just talking about CO2, but also about methane, which is quite a particular topic for local government due to waste and landfills and so on. So there's wonderful opportunity for scaling up these vertically integrated reporting systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Marike, for this example, this very concrete example. I would like to hand over this question also to Pontus, because I know that you, Pontus, you do work in very, let's say, community-based projects, but you also very much engage into this urban policy writing. How could you comment this from the UN Habitat side? How are your experience about this?
I can maybe say that for us, this issue of NDCs and connecting it to what is happening on the local level in the cities is absolutely fundamental. And I think what Marike is explaining is really important. We also work with, I think I mentioned in the presentation, with national urban policies, and this is, the objective of national urban policies is for, on a national level, to coordinate and kind of guide urbanization in a good direction, let's say, so that it doesn't happen randomly and causes problems. And so it's about taking a strategic approach to urbanization. And as I said, only 14% of the national urban policies that we've reviewed have an explicit climate focus. That's obviously a major concern, something that we really need to address. I just wanted to also say something on the issue of marginalized groups, and I think what Teresa said is absolutely fundamental and something that we work in our projects as well. And our approach to smart cities is people-centered, all about including residents and communities, etc. But I think it's also important to talk about the benefits of the transformation that we need to marginalized communities. It's at the moment, it's marginalized communities, the most vulnerable, who are being the most affected by the effects of climate change. They're also really affected by things like energy poverty and poor air quality and things like that. So there's also a real benefit to the transition to the most marginalized, and I think we need to really talk about that. But it's also absolutely crucial that this transformation will require huge investment, money, cost, and so issues of redistribution, issues of climate finance, issues of climate justice, I think are absolutely fundamental, so that the costs are not disproportionately borne by those who are already vulnerable or marginalized, and we need to put a lot of focus on that if this is going to work. Otherwise, the transformation will not be possible. It won't have kind of democratic legitimacy. We will, it won't be possible. So this is kind of absolutely fundamental, I would say.
Yeah, thank you, Pontus. Andrea, I think we all pay too little attention to the topic that you do research on, and this is very, very important. So that you say that there's a lot of energy consumption behind the whole digital infrastructure. And my question is, how do you think, or how do you communicate your research to entities or to organizations like UN Habitat, GIZ? Because on one hand we do a lot of research, and on the other hand we have to develop projects, and we have to make it more concrete that it helps to meet the impacts of climate change. Can you say something about research communication, or do you collaborate also with those entities? And I saw the maps, for example. I like the map a lot with the centers of data farms. We also do a lot of maps, but when we do maps, we also use them for citizen engagement, of course. We use them like interactively, working with citizens or also stakeholders or experts when they speak about future city scenarios. Your map is probably a research map, I don't know, but maybe you can tell us a bit about how you communicate or your research to other organizations.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for the question. It's actually, yeah, it's something that I wanted to say and then kind of slipped through my presentation. But so that particular piece of work and the map that I showed is part of a current collaboration of the African Center for Cities with the Alfred Herasen Gesellschaft, which is kind of is designed around a series of workshops that we're doing with development finance actors like GIZ and the African Development Bank and in the South African Development Bank, BMZ and a few others. And so it is part of a bigger work in which we're trying to kind of match the existing mismatches between kind of the data that we have and the things that we can say as academics, and then the kind of the bottlenecks for more sustainable investment that these institutions find when they're engaging, for example, as Marika was saying, with medium-sized cities in Africa, where these cities don't have either the power because of like national legislation or the capacity to actually become credit worthy or raise their own revenues to actually prepare a sustainable infrastructure project to be financed by these actors. So the example that you mentioned is actually part of this process of engagement, and it is not public yet, but it will be after this kind of series of workshops that we're holding with development finance institutions. And at the end of it, the idea is to actually develop a protocol of interplay whereby we can actually combine, some of these models that we're kind of finding for fostering innovation, both on the supply side and on the kind of on the end user side, on the demand side. With combining, for example, the project preparation facility that development finance institutions have, and then the kind of more the accelerator model, for example, that you are bringing forth in your work as UNITAC.
Yes, yeah. If I may, I think one thing that I haven't heard from the colleagues is we need to have good governance. And for me, that is part of a just, equitable, inclusive approach. And good governance is a challenge because we need to build trust relationships between local governments and the citizens. And in many countries, that trust relationship is not there yet. Quite often, it's like an anti-authority issue or if you have challenges with fraud and corruption that you see in government. So it's a very, very delicate space, but it is a space that has to be built in order to move forward in this, also as Pontus said. So, I think this is an area where the transparency, the robustness of data, and the digitalization tools we have could really also help build that trust space as well. And I see some of the questions. I just know of one example where marginalized or highly affected people could be supported in a heatwave space. There's an Extrema app that was developed showing people in a city, in those cities that are participating, where to follow the route where you can have shading and where you can have water. So there are fantastic innovative approaches that already address specific pieces of the puzzle, but we need many more of these innovation approaches as well. That's the challenge that faces us all now.
Yeah, thank you, Marika, especially again for focusing on the governance. This is, of course, a very important issue, and I think we all know that if we implement those tools, that changes also governments a lot. It's also about a lot about democracy, and it's a very political topic because it's about data transparency. What kind of data do they want to make transparent? What kind of data do they want to hide on purpose? And this also happens a lot when we work in different countries. But in Europe, it's also a lot about innovation of governance, so that those tools and also the data make that people can work in another way. They can collaborate much more interdisciplinary. And they have to set up a new mindset of governing the cities. So I think it's a very, very crucial issue also. Is there a comment from your side on what Marika said? There is another. Otherwise, I would like to answer one last question in the chat maybe, and then our time is unfortunately up. There is a question to Pontus and Marika. Again, can you read the chat, Pontus and Marika? Then I think everyone can read it. Huh? It's about good practice.
I can have a go. This is, I think this is really linked to the question of governance in a sense. And just really quickly, my sense is that for many years, digitalization is something that has kind of happened to cities, almost like an external shock that has had to be dealt with. And cities, as local governments, as institutions, have kind of scrambled to deal with this digitalization that has kind of come from all sides. And in the last few years, there has been an increasing focus on trying to manage it in some kind of way through governance, through strategy, through establishing innovation offices or chief technology offices, etc. But I think there are a lot of cities who are still not doing that. We're actually just about to launch a study where we want to look at 15 to 30 cities and their governance frameworks, or how they're managing the transition to smart cities. We're working with CAF, the Inter-American Development Bank, on that. We're just going to start literally next week on that study. I hope the results will be out by something like March.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe just to build on what Pontus said, I would also not be able to give a percentage. I would think it's probably maybe higher than one thinks, but very low would be my guess. And even if you look now at, for example, the Smart Cities program in India, we see how they're struggling to even just get the data to identify where they fit in that whole key performance indicator assessment space. So there's much to be done in this space, and I would be super interested actually to see if one can do a wider assessment across many cities to get that understanding, because this is again, it's a tool, and that tool has to be part of the arsenal of all our local governments and all the cities around the world as well.
Yeah, thank you, Margarita, and the audience to address this issue of assessment and evaluating. This is very important. Also, in our case, when we start projects, we also start evaluating already at the beginning. Day one is also that we reflect on how to evaluate, and the evaluation is, in our case, something that doesn't come at the end. It's part of the process and part of what does it mean to evaluate? What do we want to assess? In what sense, and how do we want to also document this? Is it only an evaluation about numbers, or is it also about describing maybe situation? Is it more qualitative? Is it more quantitative? I think there are many different ways, and this has to be developed also in this whole issue. Okay, so the time is up. I have to stop now. Unfortunately, that was very, very great. I was very happy to see you all here. Thank you very much for your contributions, for the different perspectives, coming more from research, coming more from funding or partnership, the partnership perspective, the NGO perspective, the UN Habitat perspective. Thanks a lot. I know that we will all continue working together, and I hope that this was interesting for the audience. Thanks a lot to all of you, and wish you a good day, and see you soon. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.